I still think it's super weird that Nancy Drew Diaries 17 came out after book 18. I can't be the only one who's complained about this, because the publishers have tried to fix the situation. So now, A Nancy Drew Christmas has gone from being book 18 to a book with no number. Poor Nancy Drew Christmas.
Argo Font Book Review, Argo Font Book Review.
I am an amateur sleuth, and I've helped people with stuff like stolen items and blackmail attempts. Just not in this series. My last cases were sabotage, 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 and a haunting, which ended up being real estate sabotage. Take a wild guess as to what today's mystery will be. Ned must be bored of staying home all the time while Nancy goes on adventures, because he decided to start a podcast called Ned Talks. Cute title. Today he's interviewing a comedian named Brady Owens. Brady recently got into trouble for threatening a heckler. Now people are protesting his show tonight and trying to get it canceled. Nancy and Ned arrive at Brady's hotel room, only to find it's been vandalized. Brady is missing. Was he kidnapped? I was worried for Brady until I saw that Chapter 2 is titled False Alarm. Way to spoil the surprise. Brady is having lunch with Joe Archer, the director of the art complex. Joe gives Nancy 4.5 hours to solve the mystery before he cancels the show. Nancy says not to worry because she's great at solving sabotage mysteries. That's an understatement. Brady freaks out because the culprit destroyed his notebook. All of his best jokes were in there. Brady claims he can't remember his jokes, which seems a little odd to me. Does he normally stand on stage and read jokes from his book? That seems like it would make for a boring comedy show. Anyway, Brady gathers up the ripped pieces of paper and tries to put them together with the help of Ned's amazing jigsaw puzzle skills. I was unaware that Ned likes jigsaw puzzles, but I bet that comes in handy when playing the Nancy Drew video games. Nancy finds an anchor-shaped button. A maid confirms the button belongs to the culprit. Nancy feels like skipping. It's her first clue! Bess and George join the investigation and they meet the protesters who are doing a sit-in at Joe's office. The head protester is Tammy Wright, who wears preppy clothes just like the culprit. She says they've got a plan to stop the show, but everyone starts talking at once, so Nancy can't hear what they're saying. She decides, forget this, I'm leaving, instead of waiting a bit to hear her suspect's plans. Tammy's plan ends up being boycott Brady and hold a protest outside his show, which I'm pretty sure they were already doing. The sit-in was organized by Erica Vega, a professor who teaches politics of art. Erica gives a lecture on how to hold artists accountable for their mistakes, and she talks to Bess about art. Bess loves Dutch art, because the plot demands it. She's excited because a rare painting will be featured in an upcoming exhibition. Nancy's father says Joe and Brady got into a big fight during their junior year of college. Joe accused Brady of stealing his material, so Joe is also a suspect. That was, quote, close to 20 years ago, quote, and since Nancy is 18, that means Carson had a kid in his senior year of college, or shortly afterwards. I want to hear the story behind this. Did he take his baby to his graduation? Nancy distracts the hotel security guards with a false alarm so she can break into their office and watch the security footage from that morning. 3 people went to Brady's floor after he left his room. Joe, Tammy, and a mystery guy who walked strangely to avoid having his face appear on camera. George says it's probably just a coincidence. George is a terrible detective. The security guards return. Nancy and George are forced to jump out a window to avoid being caught. Our heroes learn the culprit runs a parody account on Twitter, where they pretend to be Brady and say offensive things. This clears Joe of all suspicion, because he is too old-fashioned to know what Twitter is. Isn't he like 40 years old? He should know what computers are. Tammy's the only suspect left. They decide to steal her phone to see if she runs the fake Twitter account. Luckily, George has the same model phone as Tammy. She calls the phone Chester. That's not normal. Nancy accidentally switches phones with Tammy, but it turns out she's innocent. Joe says the valuable painting is being delivered tonight, only nobody will be there to guard it because all the security guards are watching the protesters. Our heroes return to the art center where they run into the mystery guy from the security cameras. His jacket is missing an anchor button. He must be the culprit. Nancy chases after him and gets knocked unconscious, but her friends capture him. He is Louis Flynn. He gives an incredibly casual confession, almost too casual. It's like he thinks there's no law against being a jerk on Twitter. Brady starts his show by apologizing for his offensive remarks. He thanks the protesters for helping him realize his mistakes. Tammy is in the audience to hear this, so I guess she ignored her own boycott. Someone pulls the fire alarm. Nancy realizes there is a second culprit who is stealing the valuable painting. They rush to the art center and catch Erica Vega red-handed. I'm a little disappointed that her relationship to Louis is never explained. He's clearly fine with taking the fall for her crimes. Why? She's in it for the money. What is his motive? Joe feels bad that he didn't listen to the protesters earlier. If he had, none of this would have happened. I guess that's true, but if he had given in to the protesters, then security wouldn't have been moved from the painting. So, in a sense, Erica's lucky her sabotage plan failed. If it had been successful, it would have foiled the art heist. Also, she's lucky Joe didn't do the obvious thing and hire more security guards. The end. Post-book follow-up. Can I say it's really cool that a fake Twitter account is a plot point in this book, and it's used correctly? I know I've said this multiple times already, but in book 2, Nancy didn't know what Google is. I am glad that the technology has been upgraded for this series. The only mistake was saying that tweets are only 140 characters long, but that was changed about 2 months before the book came out, so I'm guessing it was true when the author originally wrote it. The writing is generally good. Nancy's friends play a big role, which is nice, and I always like it when Nancy does clever detective moves. Several reviewers on the internet were impressed that the book has a second culprit. And yes, it's great that the book didn't stop with Louis. It would have been so disappointing if the culprit was a person we've never met before. But I wasn't fooled by the fake-out culprit. I knew the art exhibition would be important, thanks to the cover and the book's summary. Plus, the story got put on hold 3 times in order to talk about the rare painting for several pages. I figured out, aha, the culprit's going after the painting, and I pegged Erica as the culprit about halfway through. Haha, I'm a genius. I figured out the culprit's identity. Yeah. Like the previous book, they included a topical political story, namely a comedian getting fired for an offensive joke. The tension between censorship and free speech makes for a good theme, and the resolution is even-handed, admitting both sides have made mistakes. Famous mistakes. However, the book clearly favors the censorship side of the debate. Erica, Tammy, Carson, and Nancy all give lectures to the effect of Brady is wrong. On the other side is Joe and Brady, who both apologize for being wrong. So it's definitely one-sided. Not as bad as the previous book, which was so one-sided it was ridiculous. Overall, this was a good book. Book 16 was so terrible, it set a really low bar for this one. I'm glad to see this book pass with flying colors. Let's keep the good momentum going. I give Nancy Drew Diaries number 17, Famous Mistakes, a 9 out of 10. Getting back to Nancy's father, he specifically says that almost 20 years ago was junior year for Joe and Brady. We don't know if it was junior year for Mr. Drew. Maybe it was freshman year for Mr. Drew, and he had a kid in junior year. That's possible.